Welcome to the show today. Today I have Monica Hernandez on the show, and she's the Senior IT Communications and Innovation Consultant at Swiss Re. I'm super excited to have you here and dive a little bit into topics like human-centered innovation, leadership, and of course your story as well. So welcome to the show.
Hello, Daniel. Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's
Yeah,
exciting
my
time.
pleasure. Yeah. So let's dive right into the story that you have. What's your journey been so far? Maybe you could share a little bit of your background and also a couple of stages or moments that you feel are really important to you along the way that you had so far.
Yeah, of course. I mean, that's a long answer, but I'll try to be brief. Well, basically, I'm originally from El Salvador, so really far away from Switzerland. And I would say that, in there, something that really like marked me is that I grew up in a family where both my parents had really strong professional careers. And on the one hand, like seeing my mom as a woman, right, having a strong professional development, I think that really instilled something in me. And then on the other hand, my dad, he was an IT manager in a telco company. So I remember growing up with all the latest technology and gadgets all around. So I think, these two things really kind of shaped me in a way. And if I, when I go back and I go back to my experience, especially like the professional experience, right? I feel like I can see how, without planning it or whatsoever, I got into a digital transformation to another digital transformation and so on because I started working very young, and my first experience was at a media company. So I remember being there when we were transitioning to digital cameras and where social media was starting to be a thing. And I remember like going through all that change, right? Going through all that change at that stage with my peers, right? What did that mean? Like new technology, what's happening, adjusting, all of that, right? And then, I moved on, and then I worked in mostly multinational B2C companies in marketing area. My background is marketing and communications. And in there, again, right, it's like marketing, and then digital marketing started to be a thing. SEO, SEM, what is that? How do we use that? Especially the data part that came to the marketing and communications that mentions, right? How do you have all of this and how do you act on it? So yeah, so for me it was like, as I said, because technology was always kind of something that I was passionate about. I think because of my dad, like he managed to instill that in all of us. um, and it just, for me, it was curious to see how technology was changing everything, not only being a tool anymore, but changing the way that we do business, and especially the way that we behave as humans, right? So that triggered my attention, and then I moved along those lines. So I was working on communications and marketing, more in the new communications and marketing area, where you got to a chance to play with technology and introduce new technology. um, and then at some point when I graduated, I realized, okay, I'm missing two things, because of course I have a communications and marketing background, but I'm missing two things. First is to have like an end-to-end overview from a company perspective, because I was involved in all these initiatives to introduce technology. How do we use new technology? But I didn't have the full picture of how a company worked, right? So I was missing that. And then the second is that I wanted to know more about innovation, technology, what's going to happen, what does this mean? Not from only like a tool perspective, but also like a human behavior perspective, right? So that's when I decided, okay, so I'm going to go for a master's. I studied in IE Business School in Spain. And I did a master that involved two things: the management, the international management part, and the digital specialization, right? To understand a little bit of both. And then after that, after I finished that, then I got the chance to work as a consultant. And as a consultant, I had the opportunity to work with the ICT division of the European Commission. So I worked in these really large ICT projects to release new technology at a European scale. And it was a great experience. It was a super great experience because then you got to work with different startups, governments, research labs, like a lot across Europe. So you got to, like, at least I got to experience all of that. And the only part that I was missing back then, I really enjoyed it, but what I was missing is that these projects were massive, were huge. So we were talking about 7 years delivery, the shortest maybe 5 or 4. So it was super interesting, but then I was missing a little bit because I come from a B2C background, right? Multinational companies, mass consumption, all these kind of things. So I was missing a little bit to see the impact, right? Okay, so we're working on developing this amazing technology, but I want to see how is that being used? What's the impact? What's the value? Again, the impact on human behavior, what's happening, right? And that's what pushed me to join Amazon in Spain. So I joined Amazon, and as you can imagine, its value is instant in Amazon. So it was a really great experience. And again, without planning it, I was there in the team that helped sellers to basically start their online e-commerce stores, right? And the ones that had them, how they can start selling across Europe, which was a big step for some of the companies, right? So again, it's like all these technology transforming, delivering value, and of course at Amazon, customer centricity and human-centered design is at the core of the company value, right? So it was really a great school to see that. And then later on, I then moved on and moved to Switzerland, basically. And then I saw this great position at Swiss Re, which was about, again, transforming the digital workplace scenario and start with an agile transformation journey. And I actually didn't know Swiss Re. I didn't know the company. I just saw the role and I read the description and I immediately said, this is for me. I mean, really, it's like, it's me described in a paper. So I joined Swiss Re and 4 years ago now, and it's been quite a journey. It's been quite a journey to see how a company like Swiss Re transforms, how the impact of digital transformation in such a company, and being there, in the driving seat, like seeing from 0 to we're not in 10 yet, but seeing all the development. It's been a really great experience.
Really interesting. Thanks for sharing, and also sharing the different aspects that has a red thread basically throughout your journey. It's really interesting to see. And one thing that you already started talking about was this human centricity. So I want to dive in there and talk a little bit more about that. So when we talk about innovation, basically, in your perspective, how important is the human being inside of that innovation piece?
I think it's basically key. And I think that this is something that we learned and we got to experience now to be more current in the pandemic. We've seen that happening, right? I mean, the impact in human health, that's the center, that's the problem, that's the challenge. And then everything else, resources, innovation, manpower comes around that. And when everything comes around that, then we see a vaccine, right, in less than 1 year. And I think that that's exactly what should happen and what happens in some companies. Like when you have a look at your customer base, right, and the human that is behind the services that you provide. I really like a quote by the CEO of Airbnb that he says, it's better to develop a product or a service that 100 people will love rather than something that 100 million will somewhat like, right? So you cannot achieve that if you don't put the human being at the center, understanding the needs, understanding their problems, and you as a company being flexible and also having an open mind, right? And being flexible and fast to adapt. I think that that's the core.
Yeah, it's really interesting also from the quote, because it's this difference between liking and loving is actually quite a big difference, because there's, to me, like, when I look at the spectrum of, you hate something basically, and you'll maybe use it once and never ever again in your life, and something you love and just can't get away from because it just for some reason does whatever it does, makes your life easier. It it just serves the human needs that you have. And then sort of like, as you get closer to the middle, I feel like there's sort of like this actual black and white line that goes before there's no momentum, and then there's momentum. And what I mean by that is, like, when you like something, maybe you use it, once in a while, but you're probably not going to tell your friends about it. You probably, don't interact too much with it, and you're not going to become a beta tester of new features or whatever. But if you love something, there's so much more that's happening around your engagement, around you. It's not just that you use the app more or use the service more. That's not just it. There's so many other things around that happen that you can hardly quantify, but it just creates this momentum. So I really like what you shared in terms of the difference between like and love, because I really believe that there's this black and white line when it comes to momentum. And on the one side of the line is the like, and on the other side of the line is the love. So I want to dive a little bit more into that more practically, and when it comes to digital products, digital services, platform solutions, business models, whatever it may be. So let's talk a little bit more about that. In your experience and your perspective, what are things that make digital products or digital services succeed, and what are things that make them fail?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think, at least in my experience, when you look at product and services, or digital product and services, I think success areas, and especially in this era that we're living, it's basically based in three things, I would say. First is data, how you collect, curate, model, and especially understand data about your consumers, about your products, about your services. Second, I would say that it's the agility, right? The agility to react on the data that you're seeing, and act on it, because it doesn't matter if you have a great pattern of data, but if you don't really act on it, then it's really worth nothing. And the third area I would say is customer centricity, right? That it's embedded in general in companies or in teams, because the thing is, I've seen, like, in different experiences where you are too focused on data, and then it's like data on the one hand, the customer on the other hand, right? And you don't see it as a whole. So that's a problem there, because then you, of course, like, if you have, let's just imagine that we're in a research team, right? If you're focused too much on data, then of course you're going to enhance and you're going to build an amazing product. But then just after you build it, then you're going to discover if the customer likes it, right? Which is what we've been experiencing, well, for quite a long time now. Now, of course, it's changing. So if you then embed the customer view, customer pain points, their user voice, their feelings, and all of that in the process, then it's easier, because then you get immediate feedback, and then it comes the agility, right? That you have the capacity to have a look at the data, inspect, reflect, and adapt, and then go again and ask the customer, okay, so is this fine? Is this solving your problem? Is this solving your need? And being, more and more effective, so that you proactively capture these data points from the customer, and you don't even need to ask them, because you already know more or less how they are behaving, and you proactively change something in your product or in your service, and you see immediately the trends going up or down, and then you're fast enough to recover and adapt. So I think that in general, like if you have these three things, it tends to give you an advantage or an edge to succeed. And of course, on the other hand, what tends to make you fail is probably the opposite, right? That you don't have this integrated view, for example, that you, let's say you are reactive, that you just provide services because you think that this makes sense, or this makes sense, in the business plan model, how you usually put it together. But then you don't validate, for example, with customers, and especially the ability to being agile and being lean, to just develop something that you can put outside in the market and see the type of feedback that you're getting. So yes, that's what I would probably say out of my experience.
I love how you packaged it into the simplicity of three things and went deeper into the different aspects and also how they play together. Now, one thing I'm always curious about is how to deal with different stakeholder groups. And the basic example is, this is the user and the customer, right? And it's obvious that this would work best for them and this is what they want. And then you have the business and you got the strategic direction of the business. You have the perspectives here, you have opinions as well and assumptions and all kinds of things. And sometimes they work well together and sometimes they clash. Sometimes they don't work well together. Now, my question to you is basically, how do you deal with stakeholder misalignment? So how do you deal when goals and needs of different stakeholder groups don't align? How do you deal with those situations?
Yeah, it's a very, very interesting point. And it's I think, a big challenge in a way. But at least in my experience, or what I got to see, it has to do with two things, transparency and managing expectations. Because the thing is, in transparency, I'm not sure like if you agree here with me, but a lot of people, they say, oh yes, let's be transparent. I love transparency. Let's have transparency in our company, in our teams and everything. But a lot of the teams and the companies, they don't really realize what transparency really means. So transparency is exposing yourself. It's actually having the courage to be vulnerable, to show your numbers, to show your value, to show completely what your goals are, right? So if that's clear, if you're transparent with your stakeholders and you say, listen, this is what we've got from our customers. This is the value that we can deliver in terms of either revenue generating or cost savings or productivity gains or cost avoidance. That's why this is number one, right? And if we all have clarity that that's number one, and we are all part of the same team because we want to win together as a company, as a team or whatever, they will tend to understand it. But for that, you need, as leading a team or a company, you need to be able to have that. And not a lot of teams do have that information or do want to share that information, or are ready to put themselves in this position, right? But as long as you have that, people, of course, if we're part of the same team, we want to win together, right? And you will understand it. And the second part is again managing expectations, right? Because as I said before, everything that drives innovation should be centered in the human, in your customers, for example. And humans, we change constantly, right? Unfortunately, sometimes, but we change constantly. So it might be that, yes, when we started this was at the top of the value chain. But as we further advance, I'm being transparent with you, this is not valued anymore. This that you really liked is not being very valuable, very well received. So we need to deprioritize that. So of course, if you manage those expectations constantly with the stakeholders, then it's different. It's a different perspective that we had before, where you as a stakeholder, you came to me, you requested something, then I delivered that to you, and yes, and I try to please you with it, right? Now is way different. It's like, come on board, understand how we're going to win this challenge. And you are part of it, right? You are part of it. You can provide feedback. You can see everything that we're doing. You can see what the customer is saying. So at the moment where we need to deviate or we need to cancel something, you will know, you will understand it because you've been part of the journey.
Now, this is great because it directly leads me into the next part, which is, the journey, basically, the journey of change. And let's say we're starting the journey of change now for something new, something, that we want to try out, we want to build, we want to test. When you're starting this journey of change, how do you get people on board? So how do you get management on board? How do you get different stakeholders on board? How do you get different teams on board? How do you get them to join you basically on that change?
Yeah, it's quite a challenge, I would say, too. Like how do you start, right, with the movement? And I'm not sure if you're familiar with a YouTube video, like of the followers video, where there's a kid that he starts like dancing like crazy down the hill. And then it says it's titled The Power of Movement. And it's just this crazy guy like dancing around. And then suddenly like more than 50, they join just to dance like him, like crazy, right? And then it's like, it's a question of how do you start that in a company, right? How do you start change? And I think in general, at least in my experience in companies, of course, and also like a personal level, right? You start to change when you realize, oh, I can do this better, or when you identify a problem, or when it's affecting you, right? When something is affecting you, you then say, okay, I need to tackle this. Or, for example, that's like more the reactive part. But if you're more a proactive person or more a proactive company, then you see what's ahead, and then you see like there's an iceberg over there. What can I do to kind of move around it, right? But it starts with a problem, and it starts also with a vision, I would say. Like, how do I think that I can change that? And once that you have, at least, what I've experienced is that once that you have this vision of what you foresee to change and why, especially why you need to change, whether it's in a company, whether it's in a team, whether it's in your personal life, and that you see yourself as an actor of change, like I can do this, right? Then when you have that clarity, then it's about, of course, sharing it in the right way, like in a company, in a corporate environment. Then you have different strategies, right? You can do top down, bottom up, start middle, start small, but then you take action on how you're going to start spreading the change. And what it's really, really important is to walk the talk, right? Because if you have, what I've seen, for example, in many companies, is that they say, yes, we need to change, and this is the new culture now. For example, now we're going to be agile, and all the decisions we're going to make as a team. But then the next day, I have an executive meeting just with my 5 peers, and then I make all the decisions, right? So that doesn't work. And also here, it's again managing expectations from your peers, like, for example, top level, but also for employees, that this is a journey, right? It's a journey. That's why I come back to the vision part and the values, because it's a journey for everyone. So, for example, let's say that I'm the CEO of a company, and I know that I need to change, and I know that I need to change my culture, and I need to do all of that. I know that that's necessary, but I'm human too, right? So of course it's a journey, it's a transition. So I need to refer back to the values so that I come back to them again, and I can build trust within my employees, right? And I think that that's really key. It's really key to walk the talk, and to be centered around different values that will shape the mindset that you need within your company. Then what is challenging, of course, and here then it comes my communications background too. Of course, like you can use communications, for example, to embed this change, to raise awareness, to drive people forward, to reinforce the behaviors that you want to see, the mindsets that you want to see. But you can have an amazing campaign, you can have an amazing strategy on how to manage change, how to do this. But if you don't have management or the drivers of change actually acting like they should or like they're supposed to, then it's really not going to be worth it at the end of the day.
Yeah, it's a really, really, really good point. Especially about when it comes to the change in people as well. I think that is such an important topic that you addressed there, and also understanding that basically it is a journey. May happen overnight, it may not. Some people take longer, some people get it instantly. So there's one more question actually I want to ask you, which is not part of the whole conversation we just had basically before, but it's always a question that I'd love to ask. Basically, it's a little bit more out there and up in the sky, but I always love to ask it. So let's say you're 80 years old now, and you're sitting in your rocking chair, and you're looking back at your life, and you're seeing all the things that have changed in the world of business, everywhere basically. Looking back at that moment, what is something that you would love to see changed?
Wow. I hope I don't get to drive anymore. That's for sure. No, I think, it's I think I would like to see two things. Like one, and I think we're starting to see that, because, for example, I think in regards to technology, before, technology was perceived as a tool, right, that we could use. We could use it and we can adjust it according to our needs. And I think we've been living so far, like technology has been driving the way that we behave. We got all of these technologies, social media, well, all the technology that we got. And it's like it's driving us rather than us driving the technology, right? And these companies, the tech companies, are leveraging our data and everything to become better and better at driving us, right? And what I would like to see is the moment where we are fully empowered and we are aware that we are in charge and that actually technology is there, but to serve our purposes, right? So I would like to see that changing. I think it's starting to change a little bit, and I think it will change even more, right? We will realize the power that we have, and rather than technology shaping us, how we can use technology to shape us, to shape ourselves, to shape societies, to shape our companies, right? And I would like to see that happening on one end. I think a lot of interesting things will come out of that. And on the second hand, is also around empowerment, like empowerment from a consumer perspective. I think more and more we realize that, for example, like if you want to have sustainable products, more and more we see how consumers are willing to pay a bit more so that this happens, right? And if this happens in terms of sustainability, we can make a lot of changes. We can, for example, decide not to buy anymore to companies where we know that goods are being produced in a not a very sustainable or even legal way. And the more and more we see that also, like in our ownership as consumers, I think we're gonna have and we're gonna shape again interesting companies, interesting startups, interesting technologies, even though we need to pay a little bit more for that. But I would like to see those two things happening.
I love that. It's a beautiful vision. I really, really love that. And it's not so, completely out there. I think it's something that is very realistic as well. If we all I think stick to our human consciousness and and stay human as long as we possibly can. So, hey, Monica, thank you so much. I really appreciate you being here, sharing your insights and your perspective and experiences and all these topics. And I wish you a great rest of the day. And thanks again for being here, Monica.
Thank you for inviting me, Daniel, and we keep in touch, I guess.